Morley Robbins is a retired hospital executive, 12 years, and a healthcare consultant of over 20 years. He chose to become a wellness coach in 2009. In the process, he's become a self-taught mineral expert. His highest purpose is to share this decade of daily scientific research on the profound metabolic interplay between three minerals: magnesium, bioavailable copper, and iron. These mineral-driven metabolic concepts are not fully understood nor appreciated in practitioner circles and are certainly not in the public's consciousness. I'm just going to go off script here for a second because this is one of these things that, as a periodontist, I've known for years that iron was a problem. I mean, we could see it in our patients, especially patients who were getting supplemental iron. You could almost see this instantaneously that these patients would start to become worse. So I've known that this is a problem, but I've never really understood mineral physiology to the point that I thought I could give patients good information or good advice. Then, a couple of years ago, during one of Joe Mercola's podcasts, this is like at the tail end of COVID, I see this guy coming on talking about iron dysregulation. I thought, no, I'm going to listen to this and see what this guy has to say. Now, he throws out a number of kind of interesting ideas, and I think, yeah, I'd like to know more about this. I go to his website, start looking into this. And then, by chance, I've got a number of Amish patients in my practice. And one of them is a soil mineral, I'm going to call him an expert, but he sells soil minerals. And so I asked him, and I said, hey, you guys do like supplemental copper, and tell me about this. And he looks at me, he goes, oh, yeah. He goes, Morley was talking to us about this. And I'm like, Morley? Like, you know Morley Robbins? And he's like, well, yeah, he came to our community. This is in Rockville, Indiana. This is a small community outside of Indianapolis. I'm like, well, how did you guys get Morley Robbins to come and speak at your community? And I'm thinking, well, of course, like, he can't do online stuff with the Amish, you know, duh. So I'm like, so how do I get in contact with this guy? So his brother is an Amish physician, and he's one of the few Amish you can actually contact directly. I think you get special dispensation from the bishop to have a phone. And I call him up and I said, hey, you know, next time you guys have Morley, I'd like to meet this guy in person because, you know, he doesn't like ozone that much. All right, so I need to find out what's his problem with ozone. They said, well, by chance, in about 6 weeks, he's going to be in Fulton County, Pennsylvania, at another Amish community. So, short story, I end up in a Amish road trip, going to, and basically listening to Morley do a presentation in probably the nicest basement I've ever been in, you know, for a presentation, but it was kind of amusing because, you know, Morley would have to stop periodically because the batteries would run out because you didn't have any plugins. And so in between, of course, I'm sitting in the front row, you know, the only one not with a beard or a hat. And he's like looking at me because I'm, you know, constantly asking questions. And finally, after, I don't know, like 7th or 8th question, he finally goes, do you have like any easy questions, or like what are you doing here? And so then finally we start talking about the ozone, and then since then, you know, it's been quite a, how can I say, life-changing event for me in terms of like understanding this mineral physiology better. And I'm still scratching the surface on this. So any of you who are really interested in mineral physiology, you really need to pay attention to what Morley's putting out there, because I feel that this is something that in medical school, dental school, we are completely misguided on this topic. So anyway, I'll stop there. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Mr. Morley Robbins.
So 11 years old, root canal, still wearing the tooth that I got 60 years ago. And then last year, I happened to mention to Mike that I had a hole in the back of my tooth. He said, really? He said, well, maybe you can stop by the office and we'll take a look at It's another kind of plaque, right? And what the universe wanted me to experience was just how professional, how persistent, and how compassionate dentists can be. And I was graced with Reed Winnick, who realized I was a little nervous sitting in this dental chair while Mike was using a jackhammer on the inside of my mouth with no Novocaine, no nothing. And it was the most amazing experience of my life and totally transformed that experience that I'd had as an 11-year-old. Why do I bring that up? Well, I read articles, and I have for the last 15 years. I developed what's called frozen shoulder from 20 years of pulling a suitcase behind my back through airports, trying to solve problems of making hospitals bigger and better, and couldn't pick my hand up above my waist. And I went to a health food store outside of Chicago, explained what the problem was. And they said, well, you need to go see Dr. Liz. And I went, I don't do witchcraft. I work with hospitals and doctors, and just sell me some supplements. They sold me supplements. They did no good. I couldn't sleep. I was in such writhing pain. I went back to the health food store a couple months later. I said, you must have something stronger. And the owner looked me in the eye. She said, Morley, we love you. Go see Dr. Liz. So with my tail between my legs, I went to see Dr. Liz, who does network chiropractic. She's in the second row. She's now my wife. And she healed my frozen shoulder. There's a pterygoid muscle here. You all probably know about it. Probably know 1,000 times more than I know about it. And with the full weight of her body and her finger as the fulcrum, she put pressure on this, which was exceedingly painful. But as she did that, my arm went straight up. And what sparked my presence today was a conversation 15 years ago with Dr. Liz. She started talking about the innate healer. And I looked at her and I thought, I've never heard that phrase before. I was thinking to myself, if there's an innate healer, great, thank you. If there's an innate healer, why do we have millions of doctors around the world? I didn't get that. I did not understand that at all. And so I set out to find out who the innate healer is. And I wrote a book about it. It's called Cure Your Fatigue. And the part that all doctors miss, the part that cardiologists miss, is the work of Douglas Wallace at CHOP, Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. He's an absolute genius. Wrote a very important article in 2005 about cellular energy deficiency. And that's when the plaque starts, Dr. Schallenberger. As soon as the endothelial cells can't make energy, they start to recruit help in the form of macrophages that become foam cells. Now, I'm not here to debate that. I just want you to understand that what I'm going to do today is pull the curtain back a little bit farther than what you just heard in the last presentation to leave the world of big particle physics, I like to call it Newtonian medicine, and get down to quantum medicine, which is minerals. It's a completely different world. And our bodies are just like this device. They don't work without batteries, do they? And so that's, at a deep cellular level, is what's wrong with the world today, especially post-COVID. I renamed what COVID stands for. COV, coppers vanished. ID, irons dysregulated. And if you think it's more complicated than that, we can have a conversation after my presentation. COVID is all about hepcidin. And it's a very dynamic situation. But it's not what we've been taught to believe it is. So Dr. Schellenberger, can you come up and... What we have here is a failure to communicate, of course. All right. There are two types of people in the world. Those who want to know, those who want to believe. What's the three-letter word in believe? Lie. Please, on bended knee, don't confuse your training with the truth. You were not taught about minerals. How many people in this room know about ceruloplasmin besides Reed and Tammy and Mike? One or two people. It's the protein that runs our body, folks. Ceruloplasmin, blue protein. Only has 20 functions in the body. I vowed that I was going to develop a 3-day medical school. Day 1 is going to be to measure minerals. Day 2, restore minerals. Day 3, learn how to play golf. Wonderful book if you haven't read it, Dirt to Soil. The food that we're eating is being grown in dirt. We need soil where the microorganisms are. But there's a wonderful quote here in this book by Gabe Brown. If you want to make small changes, change how you do things. If you want to make major changes, change how you see things. And what I'm hoping to do over the next 45 minutes is get you to see the whole dynamic of dental health, oral systemic health in a completely different light. When I heard that phrase last year, I'd never heard oral systemic health. I was galvanized by that. I was like, these people know what they're talking about. I was really excited in the same way that I was excited that Dr. Liz was talking about the innate healer, because they don't talk about that in conventional organized medical circles. So very important concepts. Now, you all know about the simple lie versus the complex truth, right? And most people want it simple. Where's the easy button, right? But if you really want to get to the truth, you've got to get into the literature. You've got to get into the literature. And I really appreciate, Dr. Schellenberger, the fact that you were not afraid to show slides from, or studies from 1968. I actually prefer them 1905, 1910. They're much, much better. But I read for about 3 hours a day. Yep, I'm that kind of geek. The funny thing about this, if you all saw my college transcript, you'd say, how does this guy know how to spell iron, much less talk about it? Late in life epiphany, the procedure with Dr. Liz, the sudden release of whatever it was that was holding my arm back, I've become this academic zealot. I can't explain it. Certainly my college professors would be shocked. But 2 articles that I wanted to bring to your attention. 2024 by Dr. Svetlana Lutsenko. She's up at Hopkins, or I should say out at Hopkins. She would be maybe the Weston A. Price of copper research, just to put it in parlance that you understand. She's brilliant. And she's talking about copper entry into the brain, many unanswered questions. The important point about this is that you have 100 milligrams of copper in your body. That fits on the head of a 1-inch stick pin. You have 5,000 milligrams of iron in your body. So 50-to-1 ratio. But if you want to know the truth of how much iron you have in your body, building on what Dr. Schellenberger was saying, get out your calculator, multiply your age by 365. And that's how many milligrams of iron you have in your body. And trust me, you are designed for 5,000 milligrams. And if you're like me, my age, I've got 26,000 milligrams of iron. So Dr. Liz and I have been donating blood quarterly for the last 7 years, religiously. And I would encourage everyone in this room to do so. It's the easiest thing you can do to improve your health, period. Don't worry about LP(a). Don't worry about homocysteine. You should worry about that ferritin thingy, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Ferritin is toxic to the core. Does anyone know their ferritin level? Well, that should change going forward. You should know that number. You should know your copper status. You should know your serum iron status. But what's important about Dr. Lutsenko's article is she points out the fact that 9 milligrams of copper are in our brain. That's a staggering amount of copper. 100 milligrams in the body, 9 milligrams in the brain. Again, it's 2% body weight, 20% of the oxygen consumption. But the article that I think you'll find even more fascinating, one that Michael Gosweiler brought to my attention, Sierpinska, Sierpinska, 2014, copper deficit as a potential pathogenic factor of reduced bone mineral density and severe tooth wear. So what they concluded was that the people with dental wear had 37% less copper than the people who had normal tooth wear. What they don't talk about in this article are the enzymes, lysyl oxidase and ascorbate oxidase. You ever see the word oxidase in the literature? What it means is copper is allowing the body to work with oxygen without causing stress. The oxidase enzymes are profoundly important. The enzyme that makes energy in our 40 quadrillion mitochondria, that's 15 zeros. And thank you, Reed, for finding out that's 500 mitochondria per dentocyte, is that right? So each dental cell has 500 mitochondria. Amazing to think about. But the point is, we can't make energy without copper because complex 4 of the mitochondria, the electron transport chain. Anybody know about the electron transport chain? Okay. That's where oxygen gets turned into water. And when oxygen becomes water, it's got to be a pH of 7, perfect pH, and it releases the energy molecules. Cytochrome C oxidase runs on copper. And just to galvanize your understanding, you have been taught that iron runs the body. I know you have. I've had hundreds of conversations with practitioners. I bet everyone in this room has a kitchen in your home. And in that kitchen is a stove. What's the stove made out of? Steel. Here's the question. Does the stove in your home know what's for dinner tonight? No. Does the stove know which pot to get out? No. Does the stove know what temperature to put the oven to cook the meal? No. It takes a cuisine artist. Got to spell it right. C-U-isine. Got to have copper. And it turns out in complex 4, complex 4 is a stove. Heme A and Heme A3 are holding oxygen so that the chef, the copper enzyme can slice it and dice it, add 4 hydrogens, add 4 electrons, and boom, you've got energy happening all over your body. But it's not taught in doctor's school. I find that amazing. So the expression I use is ignore the enemies, the pathogens, the heavy metals that you all are very fixated on. ignite the energy. Because when the cells have energy, the innate healer takes over and the body knows exactly what to do. So times like this, I feel like I'm Harold Abrams, 24 Olympics. I've got 10 seconds to make a point. And I'm going to start the race. And that's 10.1 seconds. You won the gold prize. So let me boil that down for you. Make sure you understand the difference between copper and iron. Iron carries oxygen. 70% of the iron in your body is hemoglobin. Another 10% is myoglobin. And it's a waiter, carrying oxygen and carbon dioxide. Do we go to Wolfgang Puck for the waiter, or do we go for the experience? So iron carries oxygen, copper activates oxygen. Most important thing to understand about human physiology. So, number one cause of death, cardiovascular disease, right? Simple theories, but they're wrong, and I think this is building on Dr. Schallenberger's comments. Cholesterol causes heart disease. Well, now we know that's not true, right? Statins are the number one first trillion dollar industry. But mitochondrial integrity and LDL are mysteriously overlooked. But the complex explanation, which is actually right, building on what Dr. Schallenberger was saying, cholesterol actually absorbs light. Really important. Cholesterol is one of the first chemicals to appear on planet Earth. Not a disease. It takes 11 molecules of oxygen to make 1 molecule of cholesterol. Oxygen has photodynamic energy, which is activated by bioavailable copper. People in northern climates have less light, more cholesterol, less vitamin D. Cholesterol is the precursor to vitamin D. Good thing to know. If you want to lower your cholesterol, go outside, get some sunlight. Folate is the key for this conversion. What you may not know is that folate is actually copper dependent. A very important fact that most people don't know. And copper is a magnet for sunlight. The body's looking for sunlight. And copper deficiency causes cholesterol to rise. And I have a book here by Dr. Lay from 1992. It's The Role of Copper in Lipid Metabolism. I'm embarrassed to tell you I spent $400 for this book, but it blows up the cholesterol theory that Dr. Schallenberger so effectively did earlier this morning. The whole thing is a scam, folks. When they started adding iron filings in 1941 to our wheat flour in the US, the UK, and Canada, it started to create inflammation, or as our clients down in Louisiana used to call it, hey, doc, I got some of that inflammation. But inflammation, what is inflammation? Who wants to know what inflammation really is? Wouldn't you love to know that? It's piss poor energy production. Because the mitochondria is a two-stroke engine. First stroke is you've got to turn oxygen into hydrogen peroxide. And then you've got to convert that hydrogen peroxide into water. And if you keep getting stuck at hydrogen peroxide, if a biochemist were present in the room right now and we asked them, could you please spell inflammation? They would spell it H2O2. So when you have a client with inflammation, they don't have enough bioavailable copper in their body. And they don't know that because no one tests for that. And it turns out there's 80 anatomical, chemical, and physiological defects in a copper-deficient heart. And that's the work of Leslie Clavet, who's a cardiologist and a copper expert. And so here's the piece of the puzzle that most people don't know about, the role of copper. It's the Achilles heel in our body that is easily lost to stress. Iron, number one element. People have between 3,500 and 5,000 milligrams. Again, true level is your age times 365. Who did I learn that from? An individual named Robert Crichton. He's the dean of iron biology out of the Netherlands. On my 65th birthday, I called him up. I said, would you do me a favor? He said, sure, Morley, what would you like? I said, I would like you to send me a signed copy of your most recent textbook. He said, I would be honored. And he said, and as I'm taking your address, I want to make sure, do you know that we accumulate 1 milligram of iron every day we're on planet Earth? I said, yes, sir. I've read your articles and your books. He said, okay, I just want to make sure you know that. Make sure you tell people that. So now you know. 1 milligram, and this is true for all your patients, especially if they have dental disease. Where do you think the iron's accumulating? Possibly in their mouth? Where the pathogens are? We have iron fortification since 41. There's 9 different forms of iron being added to the food system. You can relax knowing that all 9 of them cause cancer. Iron infusions are, unfortunately, a regular prescription. Does anyone know of someone who had an iron infusion? It's the pregnant women and the seniors that I worry about the most, being absolutely abused as a treatment. And iron oxide is being added as a coloring agent in most medications. Copper, on the other hand, number one deficiency on the farm for 80 years. Number one nutrient deficiency on the farm. Here's the part that I haven't shared yet. Copper is the general. Iron is the grunt. Generals have stars on their shoulders, right? What are those stars made out of? Brass. What's brass made out of? 88% copper. And what are generals really good at? Telling the grunts what to do. And that's exactly the way it works inside our body. Copper regulates iron. 100 milligrams per earthling, allegedly. There's a famous copper biologist who died recently, Maria Linder. She wrote an article before her death in fall of 22, and she indicated that she thought that the amount of copper in the average person was now 70 milligrams as opposed to 100 milligrams. That's a 30% deficit, folks. So let's put that in context. What's a fever? Well, to go from 98.6 to 102, it's a 4% differential. 30% deficit? That's 8 times a fever. We start out with about 70 milligrams, which we get from our mom. There's a copper download in the last trimester of the pregnancy. All mammals, not just humans, all mammals have this massive download. And if someone has a premature birth, guess what the body's telling the mother? You don't have enough copper for the baby. And uric acid is going through the roof because of it. And that's why they have the premature birth. No copper fortification nor supplementation of any kind anywhere in the food system. And there is extensive copper inhibition via, anybody know about glyphosate, Roundup? So Dr. Huber at Purdue University studies this very carefully. So glyphosate chelates copper 1 billion times faster than it chelates magnesium and calcium, and 1,000 times faster than it chelates iron and zinc. that should make your sphincters tighten up right now? There was a time when I could run an 8-minute mile. At that same time, my younger son, he ran a mile in 4:02. Pretty good. I called him up and said, "You going to go for it?" He said, "No." He said, "Dad, I could practice for months, and I don't know that I could shave off those 2 seconds." So his old man, being the fool that he can be sometimes, I went to the gym to see what it was like to run a 4-minute mile. Almost killed myself. When I realized the machine was doing all the work, and I was holding on for dear life. But that was twice as fast. We cannot relate to 1,000 times faster, 1,000,000,000 times faster. But that's what glyphosate does. And in my humble opinion, it was created with one purpose in mind: eliminate copper on planet Earth. And then we have tyrosinase inhibitors. Many of you know about ascorbic acid. Some of you might know about real vitamin C, whole food vitamin C. What runs whole food vitamin C, like the batteries of this device? It's called tyrosinase. Tyrosinase is one of the most important enzymes on the planet, in our body, and nobody knows that. And what is the cornerstone of the food processing industry? Tyrosinase inhibitors. And not to worry, all the colors from yellow to black inside our body run off of melanin, which requires tyrosinase. Colors. Oh yeah, colors are important. Colors indicate integrity of the tissue. So this is what we're up against. And we're supposed to believe the narrative. So the meme that runs medicine on the planet, it's a very simple meme. You're anemic and you're copper toxic. And we're going to do everything we can to solve that problem. We're going to give you iron, and we're going to chelate copper whenever we can. And you have no idea how that drives medical thought and action around the globe. Why 1984? How many people have read 1984? Okay. So you, of course, know it was published in 1948. You, of course, did the math. 48 from 84 is 36, right? Then you added 36 to 1984, and what did you get? Oh yeah, 2020 was the start of the totalitarian state. We just didn't know the agenda. That's what COVID was all about. If you remember nothing else from this presentation, please remember that copper is not toxic. Copper is not toxic. And iron is not deficient. There's a difference. There's a big difference between low iron in a blood test and high iron in the tissue. The blood has nothing to do with the tissue. It's all a game, folks. And the guy who figured this out, his name was Bruce Ames. I was a distinguished professor at Berkeley for 35 years. He and his colleague, David Kalilia, published an article in 2005 about aging fibroblasts, senescent fibroblasts. And what they discovered was that there can be 10 times more iron in the tissue than shows up in the blood. Wow, that's an impressive difference. So when someone shows as anemic, the first thing you should say is, maybe we should test the iron in your tissue with a needle biopsy or a Tesla 2 MRI. You're hearing from a guy who says that there is no iron deficiency anemia on planet Earth unless you've been in a car accident and you're hemorrhaging to death. whole thing is a scam. To get more iron in people, to create more oxidative stress, to create more inflammation, to create more blood clots, because you cannot create a blood clot without iron. Ding, ding, ding. It's impossible. And two of the most important anti-clotting factors are clotting factor Roman 5 and Roman 8. And guess what they run on? Copper. What a surprise. So if you want to regulate the iron, want to regulate the blood flow, maybe we should focus on the relationship of copper and iron. So copper is MIA and iron is stuck. And there's 90 years of research to back it up. And I've just got 90 articles identified here. The challenge we've got is that there's so much research out there, but guess where it's not taught? In doctor school. Not a lick of it. Not a lick of it. Here's a recent post by David Sinclair, very noted longevity expert. My younger son, Tom, the fast one, I also got a PhD from Stanford in biochemistry. And so he's fast and smart, can run circles around his old man, and told me I needed to get David Sinclair's book. He said, Dad, it's a great book. So the first thing I do when I get a book like that is I go to the index to see how many references are there on copper, how many references are there on iron, how many references does David Sinclair have in his textbook? 0. No one wants to talk about the quantum level. So the important thing is that this is the article I was mentioning earlier about Killian Ames. Just so you have an understanding, Dr. Ames was the most quoted scientist on planet Earth at the peak of his career. It's not Billy Bob Jones, just happened to have some test tubes. This is Bruce Ames telling us we have too much iron in our tissue. And just to simplify it for you, there's now a celebrated article by Lopez Otin. 10 years ago, it was 9 causes of aging. Now it's been upgraded to 12 causes of aging. All of them relate to iron. So shorthand, aging equals iron accumulation, period. That's all you need to know. Iron accumulation. This is a simple model to explain what's going on the planet. We have a seesaw of copper on one end and iron on the other. And if this is based on research from 1928, March at the University of Wisconsin, May at the University of Kentucky. And what they found is that when you deny copper to an animal, where does the iron accumulate? In the liver. And what's really insidious about it, I mentioned ceruloplasmin, the sky blue. I'm looking for blue. I don't see any blue. Well, there's blue in the screen. There's blue on my shirt. But the liver is a big triangle, right? But there's actually 2 triangles. There's a triangle inside the triangle. And that little triangle that's right about here, that's where ceruloplasmin is made. A really important protein. CERULO, P as in Peter, LASMIN. Now, if you were designing the human body, and if you withhold copper, where would you not want to put the iron? You don't want to put it where the ceruloplasmin is being made. And that's exactly where it goes. It goes right here. That's where the iron goes. And that as we get older, iron accumulates in the pancreas. Iron accumulates in the heart, in the brain, in our eyes. What do you think macular degeneration is? It's just a fancy way of saying iron overload. So we're going to come back to this slide. God willing, I get through all this material. Here's some important fact. Copper accumulates in the liver of animals with iron deficiency. Wow, wouldn't that be cool if they had a test to see all these people have anemia? Let's find out what the copper status is in the liver. Oh no, we can't do that. No, that would kill the whole game plan. Iron accumulates in the liver. There's a rich legacy of research behind that. And instead of needle biopsies to assess the true metal status, patients are subjected to zero information about their copper situation. Inside the body, there's a very dynamic interplay between copper and iron. You get inside the enterocyte, it's even more exciting. And I could spend the rest of the week just talking about those two slides, but I won't. I could spend the rest of the month talking about this slide. And all I want you to do is get the impression that copper sure does a lot of things inside our body that no one ever told us about. It is mind-numbing what we don't know about the role of copper in the human body. And what's interesting is half of it's in our bone marrow. 26% in the muscle, 27% in key organs, and 1% is in the blood. And what do they love to do? Test the blood and say, oh, you're copper toxic, because the copper's unbound from the ceruloplasmin, and you need more iron, and we got to chelate that copper out of you. I'll let you in on a little secret. Copper and iron express differently in the blood and the tissue. When copper is high in the blood, it's low in the tissue. The tissue is starving to make energy. If iron is low in the blood, where is it high? In the tissue. And it's causing oxidative stress far worse than you can imagine. They express differently inside the body. And what's the question that never gets asked? What caused copper to leave the ceruloplasmin protein that is critical for human health? What caused it to become unbound? Well, I've got some secrets for you. Hyperglycemia blows up ceruloplasmin. Glyphosate blows up ceruloplasmin. Ascorbic acid, folks, not real vitamin C. Ascorbic acid blows up ceruloplasmin. And then that copper gets bound by albumin, and it doesn't have the same metabolic punch inside the body. So be careful about, oh, you're copper toxic. So when you see this picture, what's the metal that comes to mind? Iron, right? Of course, we've been trained like circus bears. Has anyone been to a circus and seen the circus bears? It's amazing, isn't it? Wearing their pink tutu, riding the bike. We are the circus bears, folks, because they've taught us to not think about copper and to think, oh, I can take as much iron as you've got. Give me more. It's insane, the amount of iron in our tissue. I've talked about the stove and the kitchen. As you can well imagine, there's a narrative and there's truth to the iron metabolism in our body. This is the enterocyte. These are two enterocytes, right? These are the villi. What keeps the enterocytes together? Would you like to know? Really cool. What keeps the enterocytes together? It's called energy. When the enterocytes make an energy here, it keeps the tissue together. If it starts to wobble, not making as much energy, there's a space that opens up, and then the proteins come through. What causes the enterocyte to stop making energy? Too much iron in the diet? I did a presentation in Arkansas. Iron. They thought it was funny. But the narrative is that 95% of the iron comes through the enterocyte, through our diet. How many people believe that? Oh, come on. You were trained to believe that. You're just playing with me now. And only 5% comes from this recycling program. Do you realize it took me 2 years to figure out what reticuloendothelial really meant? It means recycling. Why didn't they just say that? But here's the truth. Every second of every day, we are making 2.5 million red blood cells, and every second we are breaking down 2.5 million red blood cells every second. And guess who's running the show? They're called reticuloendothelial macrophages, recycling macrophages. And guess what they run off of? Batteries, just like this device, made of copper. And if copper's not running that show, all hell breaks loose. The truth of the matter, I don't think this is working. Isn't it funny? The guy talking about energy doesn't have a device that's working. The universe does have a sense of humor. We get 1% of our iron from our diet and 95% from the recycling program. And all this idea of, oh, we need more iron in our diet, we've got to fortify it, is pure narrative. And they've known that since the 20s. Copper runs the recycling program, and when copper's missing, that's when there's a problem. And then hepcidin, some of you may have heard of that. Hepcidin shows up in copper-deficient bodies, folks. And guess what hepcidin is identical to? The spike protein. How about that? Let's put the spike protein, let's put hepcidin inside people and watch them basically fall apart because of iron and copper. And that's what the research is now revealing. They're beginning to realize, oh my God, copper and iron were really affected by this dynamic. And who figured all this out? McCants and Widdowson in England back in the 30s and 40s. Geniuses, absolute geniuses. So I'm going to fly through these. So this is a study from 1928. 29, there was a follow-up study. I just want you to know the literature is very, very full. 35, 48, 68, 83. The same theme. Copper, iron are connected at the hip, folks. Just not taught in doctor's school. 85. 2003. 2005. That's the study by Ames. And then I got to this study, and this is when I lost my hair. Very important study from 2013 by Squiddy. And what it's revealing is a relationship between copper and iron metabolism. There are thousands of studies of iron metabolism. Thousands and thousands and thousands. You'll be happy to know that there are actual studies of copper metabolism, but they're in the hundreds. There is a difference between thousands and hundreds. And you'll be thrilled to know that there's actually studies about ceruloplasmin, and its nickname is CP. When it's loaded with copper, it's called holo, full, as opposed to apo, missing, empty. Holoceruloplasmin is your friend. And there are dozens of studies about that. We have thousands about iron, hundreds about copper, and dozens about ceruloplasmin. Please know, iron does not regulate itself. You've been taught that. You may believe that, but that's not true. Iron is a 4-year-old with a hammer. Now, who would give your 4-year-old a hammer and then go next door and have a cup of coffee with your neighbors? No one in their right mind. But that's organized medicine, because nobody knows about copper. And so then I came across this quotation by Dr. Sheftel from Canada. The precise mechanism by which ceruloplasmin promotes iron efflux from macrophages and other cells remains uncertain. What? This is what I figured out part-time on my own, okay? Same picture. Copper usually comes in a +2 state from the diet. And it's got to be reduced to a +1 state. Really important. Oops. And then that copper goes through a transport membrane called CTR1, copper transporter 1. Really important. Oh, did you know that fructose, high fructose corn syrup, shuts down CTR1? Well, that could be a problem, couldn't it? We don't have any copper coming in. Then we have glutathione. Again, you've all been trained that glutathione is the master antioxidant enzyme in the human body, right? It's the master antioxidant enzyme in the cell. Melatonin is the master antioxidant inside the mitochondria. But ceruloplasmin is the master antioxidant inside our body. It's a big deal, folks. And that glutathione gets it to another chaperone called ATOX1, which gets it to this pump. ATP7A and ATP7B are probably two of the most important pumps in the human body, because they're pumping. ATP7B loads copper into ceruloplasmin. So we have holoceruloplasmin. And ATP7A loads all the other copper enzymes that you've never heard of. How many people know about the PAM enzyme? Okay, we'll talk about that in a minute. Might want to get your seat belts while I'm setting the stage. So ATP7B loading up ceruloplasmin, which is changing the valence of iron from a +2 ferrous to ferric. Ferrous is very dangerous. Ferric can be loaded into transferrin and into ferritin protein. It doesn't happen without the action of ceruloplasmin. The enzyme is called ferroxidase. Ferroxidase. Very, very important. So then this statement by Dr. Sheftel doesn't make any sense anymore, because we know exactly how it works. There's precision around the world. There's dozens of copper experts. They're just not given access to the practitioners. So then we've got 2018, 2019. This is a really cool study, but I don't have time to get into it. Just know that in order to have proper hemoglobin in the body, you got to have proper energy production in the erythrocyte progenitor cells. Very, very important. Courtesy of copper. And this is a very provocative thought. It turns out there's a husband and wife team in Israel Institute of Technology. They studied the aging of the red blood cell for 25 years. Wow, that's a long time. And what they discovered is there's 5 enzymes that lead to the aging of the red blood cell. How many of them do you think are related to copper status? Yeah, all 5 of them. And so anemia is not lack of iron, it's the aging of the red blood cell because it's being oxidized by too much iron and lack of copper. Those are just 10 functions inside the cell that require copper. We just don't have the time to get into all the details. So when copper's down, iron's going to go up. When ATP is down, uric acid is going to go up. Did you know that? That's really important to know. And you can't make ATP without copper. And guess what it takes to make uric acid? You got to have iron. Got to have that iron, lots of iron. Now here's the one that's going to cause you some heartburn. You can't make bioavailable copper without vitamin A. And if you want to store iron, if you want to lower energy production, bulk up on your vitamin D supplementation. So three simple seesaws explain the sea of misery in humanity. And real quick, let me just leave you with this thought here. You probably have heard of metabolic syndrome. Well, there's 5 highs in metabolic syndrome. You have hypertension, hyperglycemia, hyperlipidemia, and hyperuricemia. But wait, there's one more. Hyperinsulinemia, which follows those other 4. Now, this is something I learned recently, which is fascinating. When insulin presents to a fat cell, get the sugar in the fat cell, there's a 2 to 3-fold increase in iron uptake by that same fat cell. And so what is insulin? It's an iron injection system that's been used since the 1920s. And what's the natural way to get sugars into the cell? Copper. Why is this not known? Because it's not looked for. I went to business school. The motto of business school is what gets measured gets managed. What runs medicine? Not known because not looked for. They know what to look for. Copper deficiency is behind metabolic syndrome. And when I shared this with Rick Johnson out at the University of Colorado, especially the hyperuricemia, he was stunned to find out that there's 14 places where copper deficiency causes uric acid to rise in the body. 14. So what is insulin resistance really? We know about insulin, right? Well, there's IGF, there's incretin, joining peptide, humanin, spexin, and chromogranin A. And those are all signaling peptides that need to be working in order to get sugar into the cell. It's not just insulin, it's a family. But they've all got to be activated by one enzyme. It's called the PAM enzyme. Peptidyl glycine, alpha-amidating, monooxygenase. I get $1 every time I say it. And it has 2 copper atoms running it. Now here's where it gets fascinating. You have 4,700 signaling peptides in your body. I exaggerate, 4,699. And over half of them require the PAM enzyme, especially the ones dealing with sugar. All of the hormones that you learned in school, all of the hormones that you know and relate to, all of the neurotransmitters that you have mastery of, all require PAM activation. And guess what is shutting down PAM enzyme in human bodies? It's called glyphosate. You have no idea. And all this foment about hormone replacement therapy, it's all because the PAM enzyme has been silenced. So you know about your computer. It's got a motherboard, right? So the CPU is our hypothalamus. The motherboard would be the HPA axis that we've all been trained in. Hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, right? We know that. We know that axis. What you need to look up is the spleen. The whole thing's a scam until you find out about the spleen. PTSD, post-traumatic spleen disorder. Look it up. It's fascinating. And then we have the modem, which are the signaling peptides. That's how our computer works, right? And this is the PAM enzyme inside our body. That copper enables the signaling to take place. It is profoundly important for our health and well-being, and yet no one talks about it. Why? Because it's very disruptive to the cash flow of Big Pharma. Very disruptive. So my only comment on your presentation, Dr. Schellenberg, was that I think statins are a great business. They're horrible medicine. I'm not defending statins, trust me. I spell them $TATIN $. An abomination to humanity. So real quick, I hope I have time for this. This will be when you get really excited. Turns out we need twice as much insulin today to clear the same amount of glucose as we did 30 years ago. Huh? What? We need twice as much insulin today to clear the same amount of sugar. Learned that from Dr. Lustig. Fructose increases carbohydrate sensitivity. That's a good thing to know. Fructose becomes sorbitol. When we're under stress, folks, our sugars become fructose. Did you know that? The sugars that you're eating turn into sorbitol. And sorbitol has a very unique property of chelating 96% of the copper around it. Oh, well, that might be a problem. And the concentration of glycosylated hemoglobin is increased in rats deficient in copper. What's the fastest way to raise hemoglobin A1C? Increase it 7-fold? Eat fructose. You're guaranteed to increase your hemoglobin A1C. And it turns out, this is I think it's one of the most amazing things I've learned. Children with Menkes disease, Menkes is a genetic disorder where the children die by the age of 3 because they can't load copper anywhere in their body. It's a very tragic situation. And it's a breakdown of that pump ATP7A. ATP7A is Menkes, ATP7B is Wilson's. And it turns out that children with Menkes disease are the most glucose intolerant people on the planet. Oh, well, that's all making sense now. We got to have copper to get the glucose in, and insulin is just a backup plan when we don't have enough copper. So we've come full circle. So Houston, we do have a problem. And it's time to take our clinical blinders off, folks. The minerals are what run the human body. And what do I think of Dennis? I think of Dennis as minerals in action. Right here. We're witnessing the ability of the body to mineralize and regulate oxidative stress right here in the mouth. And you're witness to it all day long. But it's all about energy. It's all about the balancing of the minerals, which I think is absolutely fascinating. These are my heroes. Fructose is absolute poison, folks. It creates systemic iron deficiency, and it also creates hepatic iron deposits. That's not possible. You can't do both. So it turns out that anemia is a lie. And the fact that you don't know about the iron deposits is a sin. That we don't know that iron is accumulating in our body throughout our life is tragic. And so I'm going to leave you on this last slide because Dr. Schallenberger talked about ferritin. I want you to know that there's actually 5 different forms of ferritin. There's heavy chain, which requires copper. There's light chain. There's a secreted form of ferritin, which you all are aware of in the blood test. Why is it secreted? Because there's inflammation in the organs. Why is the inflammation building? Because there's not enough copper to make energy. There's a denatured form of ferritin called hemosiderin. Your patients with diabetes have hemosiderin stains on their legs. And here's the one that you may not know about. Magnetoferritin. Anybody hear of it? We all know about Ronnie Reagan. He introduced us to supply-side demand. Well, magnetoferritin is supply-side dysfunction. There's so much iron in our body, it's changing shape. Ferritin is supposed to be hexagonal. It becomes cubic. The iron in magnetoferritin is 200 times more powerful than the iron in heavy chain or light chain ferritin. 200 times. I know a guy who could bench press twice what I could. 200 times? Again, we can't think of these numbers. But the reason why this is important, and I'll leave you with this thought, because I think I've run out of time. Thank you for not kicking me off the stage. The reason why magnetoferritin is so important, folks, you can't see it with the naked eye, can't see it with a microscope. You got to have a 0.5 Tesla to find it, and you better have a really qualified radiologist. Most MRI machines now are 3, 5, or 7 Tesla. You got to have 0.5 to find it. And guess what it's being linked to? Magnetoferritin is now linked to all forms of heart disease, all forms of cancer, and all forms of neurodegeneration. Maybe that would be something we should know about. And how do you get rid of magnetoferritin? With low frequency. It's the exact opposite of what you might think. And there's videos that you can see where people with Parkinson's have been exposed to low frequency and their tremors are gone. We have to completely rethink, how did we get into this state of ill health on this planet, and what are steps that we can take? And what I decided to do was create a protocol called the Root Cause Protocol. And it focuses on minerals, vitamins, very basic. And the funny thing is, if your patients were in the room, it would take me 5 minutes to explain it. It takes me 5 months to explain it to professionals. And that's okay, because you're having to undo a lot of your programming to understand how the body really works. So I thank you for the opportunity to be here. You've been very gracious, and I look forward to our continued dialogue going forward.